The offseason rumor mill is swirling, and people are wondering where superstar Juan Soto is going to end up. The Yankees, the Red Sox, the Cubs, the Mets, the Dodgers, the Phillies, you name it, they're in contention for one of baseball's best players, but people just don't know what the Padres are going to do. The possibility he could stay in San Diego, but there's a whole other range of possibilities, and with both Juan Soto and Shohei Ohtani on the market, two of baseball's biggest stars are potentially going to find new homes this offseason. The 2023 offseason has already been crazy enough, with people like Craig Counsell going from Milwaukee to Chicago and some other really interesting managerial choices, and more action expected to come up sooner as free agency officially started a couple days ago. But it's interesting to now look back, and as Juan Soto is a big piece of what could be a very wild 2023 offseason, the 2022 trade deadline was interesting because you had a generational superstar on the market. In this video, we're going to go ahead and look back at that Juan Soto trade about a year and a half after it has happened, see how things panned out for both teams, and look at just how good the Nationals have made out and if the Padres are going to recoup that value should they trade Juan Soto. Before we begin, if you could hit the subscribe button, you could do that by hitting that baseball in the bottom right corner at any time during this video, or if you're on TV, just hit that down arrow and hit my baseball subscription right there, and it'll take you to that page. It really helps a channel like mine grow, and it'll show that you like the content I produce, and you'll see more of stuff not only from me, but other awesome baseball content creators out there. Without further ado, let's go ahead and explore the Juan Soto trade that shocked the 2022 offseason and should set up as a good reference point to what a Juan Soto trade this offseason could end up being. As excited as I am to talk about the prospects the Nationals got back, it would behoove me to not talk about Juan Soto and what he's done in a Padres uniform up to this point. We can go on and on about what he did in a Nationals uniform. Second Rookie of the Year voting in his age 19 season, 3 top 10 MVP finishes with a second place in there as well, 4 All-Star games, 4 Silver Sluggers, and likely to make it a 5th again this year. He is just an all-around great player, and he is a dominant hitter. His defense is a little lacking, and that's something that everyone will know who knows baseball, that he's not the best defender, but he's good enough. And he's only going to be 25 in the 2024 season, which just goes to show you how dominant he's been from such a young age and why people are so excited about him in the future and why he commands such a high value on the trade market. Looking at his stats is an easy way to go and just see how good he is. In 2023, he played in every single game, which is something that less than 10 players in all of Major League Baseball were able to do in 2023. And he also led both leagues in walks with 132. That's why I have it before all the other stats. 132 walks. Think about that. That's nearly a walk a game. That is incredibly impressive. And that really helps with a solid but not great batting average of 275, turns into an on-base percentage over 100 points higher in 410. That just goes to show you how dominant of a player Juan Soto is. Pitchers are scared because he will hit a home run. He had 35 this year, a career high, with over 109 RBIs. And RBIs have their own qualms. I'm not saying that. And he's starting to steal a couple more bags. He had 12 this year with the new rules. I wouldn't expect that number to increase too much, but 12 steals is certainly a solid number, and Juan Soto is just an all-around good player on the offensive side of the ball. I've already mentioned he's not the best defender, but he's not a horrible defender. He does grade out negatively every single year except his brief stint in 2022 with the Padres, but he's not a bad defensive player. He's just not a guy that you're going to want to roll out every day. You can DH him if you want, if that's something that you think is necessary, but he profiles as a solid enough right fielder to be an everyday guy out there, and his offensive profile more than enough makes up for his defensive liabilities. The Padres have been very happy with what they've got out of Juan Soto, even though they didn't make the playoffs this year. They made a decent run in 2022, and without that resurgence Phillies teams, they probably would have made a little bit of a deeper run, but they're still a good team. The new manager coming in, Bob Melvin was a really good manager, so they're going to have to replace him as well. But if they do decide to keep Juan Soto, they have a lot of potential going forward. And if they decide to trade him, they have the ability to go and get some higher level prospects. Think of like the Rays, where they always have a 40-man roster crunch. So they need to trade away some of those players who are taking up 40-man space. Could be a deal like that. Although I don't see the Rays making that deal, there's a possibility that the Padres can still get a lot of major league ready talent into their organization to go ahead and help them now, while also getting rid of the contract and, unfortunately, the huge offensive benefit that Juan Soto gives them in their lineup every single day. The other player the Padres got in this deal was Josh Bell, and this was really them pushing their chips in, and you'll see exactly what I mean when we talk about the prospects they give up to get both these players. It was obvious that the Nationals needed to move on from Soto and Bell, but no one really expected them to come in the same package. They expected it to be two separate deals, but that was just had to be part of the negotiation that the Padres weren't willing to give up what they gave up unless they got both players, which fit a need that they really needed to address. Unfortunately for the Padres, it just did not work out in their favor. They're expecting a guy who was a solid third baseman who hit over 300 for the Washington Nationals before getting traded with 14 home runs, but things really fell off when he went to the Padres. You can see on the screen his stats now. His batting average in 53 games with the Padres is below the Mendoza line of 200. He only hit 3 home runs, and his on-base percentage was higher than his slugging percentage. His OPS from going from the Nationals to the Padres dropped by over 80 points. That is just unheard of. And they were deploying him mainly as a DH, so they weren't getting production from the guy who is a designated hitter. Things just did not work out. It was a match not made in heaven for Josh Bell and the Padres, and that's why they ended up cutting him loose after that season and letting him hit free agency and not re-signing him, because he just did not produce in the Padres uniform. Although the subject of this video sticks on the metrics of the trade, I should at least update you on where he is now. He signed with the Cleveland Guardians to start this offseason and did at least a little bit better than he did in San Diego, but not by much. His batting average was above the Mendoza line. It was up by about 40 points from when he was a Padre, and his on-base percentage hovered around the same amount, so he was walking a little bit less, striking out a little bit more, and his slugging percentage was thankfully higher than his on-base percentage, and it was about 100 points higher than it was with the Padres last year. So improvement, but nothing spectacular before he ended up getting shipped to the Miami Marlins in a deal where the Marlins were really trying to make a postseason push and were willing to go all in to get Josh Bell, who at this point had about a full year's worth of struggling to his name. Once he hit South Beach, he found himself. In just over half the games he played in Cleveland, he had the same amount of home runs. His slugging percentage rose by another 100 points almost. His OPS plus jumped by over 20. He really hit his stride. 11 home runs in Cleveland in 97 games, 11 home runs in Miami in 53. He was putting it together in his age 30 season, and he's now coming back to Miami to potentially do it again next year. So watch out. Maybe the Marlins might be a sneaky 6th seed in the wild card that can cause some havoc in the playoffs next year if Josh Bell can continue his success from the end of 2023. Now let's turn the tables and see what the Padres ended up giving away to the Nationals to get Juan Soto and Josh Bell's services. Let me tell you, at the time, it was a lot. The Padres were known to have a very deep farm system for many years, and this was about the time that notion was starting to end. A lot of their top players were graduating or close to graduating, so it made sense that, maybe the Padres farm is coming to the time that they're all contributing at the major league level, and their farm system is going to be a little bit weaker, which is part of the reason why they felt comfortable pulling this trigger. They knew they were going to have to go and rely on their major league talent, so if the farm's going to be bad, might as well go all in, and that's exactly what they did. The biggest piece of this deal had to have been CJ Abrams, who at the time, according to MLB Pipeline, was a top 10 prospect in all of Major League Baseball. The Padres took him in the 6th overall slot in the 2019 MLB draft and signed him for $5.2 million, which, I wouldn't complain if the Padres gave me that money, and I'm sure none of y'all would either. He won Rookie of the Year in the Arizona League complex that year after hitting .401 and stealing 14 bases, and that just goes to show you how good his speed is. He is one of the fastest players in all of Major League Baseball, and that is undoubtable. His run tool is elite, and not just elite, I'm talking top of the line. He is a guy who, when he taps into that at the Major League level, which we'll get into in a little bit, he will steal a ton of bases, and that's just part of his game and why he's such a highly rated prospect. Although the minor league season in 2020 wasn't held due to the coronavirus pandemic, he did really well at the alternate site where the Padres could sequester a certain number of players to go and train, and they pushed him to AA at 20 years old in 2021, and he was really, really good. Unfortunately, an injury ended up hampering him to only 42 games that year, but he has recovered well, and he's still a very exciting young player. He has a really strong hit tool, and although that hasn't manifested itself super great in the major leagues just yet, he's still a young player, and I would expect that to go and mature as he goes and plays more innings in the major leagues. He is a very gifted athlete, a very great defender. He has a plus arm, he has plus range at shortstop, which is an incredibly valuable defensive position, and on the offensive side of the ball, I already mentioned he has really great speed. He has an above average hit tool that should manifests itself a little bit better as he grows and matures. He's only 23, and his power is halfway decent for a shortstop as well. I expect that to go and continue to grow. He's going to stick at shortstop long term. Maybe, he ends up in right field should something happen and the Nationals go on a deep run, just like Fernando Tatis. He can do that very well. He's not going to win a Gold Glove, but he's a good enough defender, a plus defender, that the Nationals should be happy. His abilities are clear when you look at his 2023 stats. The new stolen base rules really helped him out as he stole 47 bases and only got caught 4 times. Although he isn't walking a ton, he had 32 walks to 118 strikeouts. He's doing better than he did previously last year in San Diego and Washington, and that's an improvement that needs to happen in order for him to develop. Again, he's only 23 years old, so looking at his slugging and on-base percentage, I expect that to go up as his plate discipline gets better, as he goes and learns to be more comfortable at the major league level, and especially on a team that's not that good. It's hard to be a great player on a bad team, and I think he has the potential to go and get better as the Nationals get better, and he gets that positive energy from what should be a winning team in a couple years. Let's have a brief intermission to talk about Luke Voit, who was an amazing player in 2020, but has been kind of inconsistent since and before then. Most people remember Luke Voit for his days as a Yankee, where he led Major League Baseball with 22 home runs in the pandemic-shortened season, leading to a top 10 MVP finish. But he was also part of this trade, as the team swapped first baseman Josh Bell for Luke Voit, and unfortunately for the Nationals, well, they were tanking anyways, but he really didn't help them in any major way. He was slightly below league average with a 94 OPS plus, but he just didn't tap into what he did in the couple previous years, and that ended up having him walk out the door at year's end. He made a couple appearances in Milwaukee this year, but nothing really major has happened for Luke Voit since he had that monster year in the Bronx, and that's just how baseball works. Sometimes you have one-year wonders, and he was a good player before that, but sometimes that's all that happens, and unfortunately for Luke Voit, that's just exactly what happened. He had 9 home runs, which is nothing to scoff at in 53 games, but he's probably never going to make the major leagues again. He'll be a career quadruple A player, guy who might get called up for a couple games here and there, and that's okay. He had a very good major league career so far, and kudos to him. He will always have that top 10 MVP finish. Let's hop back on the prospect train and talk about the other 3 big names that the Nationals ended up acquiring. The first one I want to talk about is a guy who probably had a lot of prospect fatigue attached to his name, and that's MacKenzie Gore. Gore was taken 3rd overall in the 2017 MLB draft by the Padres, signed for a huge $6.7 million contract, and although he had some injuries to his hand, mostly a blister his first full season, he has landed on the injured list a lot. That's just kind of how his minor league career has gone, and why for a lot of times he has that prospect fatigue attached to him. Prospect fatigue, for those who don't know, is just when a guy has been a prospect for a long time because they're drafted young. For instance, he was out of high school, so they take longer to develop. And so after a while, after a couple years, you're like, this guy's always been a top prospect. When is he going to break out? When is he going to, make the major leagues? And that's just natural for a guy who's younger. He did a lot with international free agents as well. Just part of being a prospect who was young when they got drafted or signed out of another country. The 2019 minor league season was really impactful for him because he made the jump to AA, which is one of the hardest jumps to do, only rivaled by the jump from AAA to the major leagues. And he was only 20 when he did that. He led that league with a 1.69 ERA and a 0.83 whip, which is really, really impressive for him to do, especially at such a young age. People were excited to see him potentially go and start in the major leagues in 2020, but we all know that the pandemic happened. He worked at the alternate site instead to fix some of the mechanical issues because he has 4 really awesome pitches. His fastball is his best pitch. It has a lot of late life to it, and it hits about 96 miles an hour, which isn't great, but for a starter, that's definitely serviceable. And he also has a really good changeup that goes in the low 80s that pairs very, very well with his fastball. He also has a good curveball and a good slider that both go and complement those pitches very well, and they're about above average in terms of break and deception compared to an average pitcher. So with that kind of arsenal, he is set up for success as a starter. With a little bit of control issues, which is natural for most pitchers, especially young ones, there has been some struggles as he went through his minor league career, but now he's in the major leagues officially and making an impact for the Washington Nationals. His win-loss record, which is already not a great metric to go and measure pitchers by, is obviously skewed because he's on a bad Nationals team, but he was decent enough. His FIP was a little bit higher than it was last year. It was just south of 5, but his whip was better, 1.4 walks and hits per innings pitched. He raised his strikeout rate by almost 1 strikeout per 9 inning and lowered his walk rate from 4.8 to 3.8 from 2022 to 2023, from 4.8 to 3.8. He's finding his groove a little bit. He's getting more comfortable. He's getting more major league innings under his belt. I don't foresee him being an ace. I don't foresee him being a star, but he's striking out enough guys to be a serviceable starter. His ERA plus was just hovering about 100, so he's not a bad pitcher by any means, and he's still young. He'll be 25 next season, just like Juan Soto. Obviously, I'd rather have Juan Soto than MacKenzie Gore. I think anyone in baseball would agree. But he's not a bad player, and he's someone that the Nationals can build around and will be a good piece if they go ahead and make a World Series in 5-6 years. At the time of the trade, CJ Abrams was the number 8 prospect in baseball, and now, currently according to MLB Pipeline, James Wood, the other piece acquired in that deal, is the number 7 prospect in Major League Baseball. He's still in the minor leagues, but that's just what happens when you have a young guy. He's only 21 right now, but the potential is huge. He went to IMG Academy, which for you football fans already know that is a school dedicated to athletics, basically a high school. So he had a lot of upside, and it proved an almost instant reward, as in his first spring training after getting drafted, he had 337, 453, 601 at single A. He just did really, really, really well, and that's part of the reason why the Nationals just had to get him in this deal. He was their second round pick in 2021 by the Padres, so the fact that they were able to get him is just huge. He also has some sneaky speed to him. He's 6'6", 240, so you don't expect a big guy like that to be fast, but he has plus run speed. I wouldn't call it elite, but it's definitely bordering on it. It's probably just a tier below that. If you were to talk to a scout who was able to go ahead and look at James Wood professionally, the speed would be one of the first things you talk about. It's just that good, and that's part of the reason why he's such a highly rated prospect. With that frame, you get a lot of power. That's probably also just a slim step below elite, but it's definitely close enough that if you want to call it elite, I'm not going to go ahead and dock you any points. And his hit tool is above average too. So if you can multiply a really good power with above average hit tool, you have a recipe for a dominant player. He has plus arm strength, and he's an above average defender in center field. He could probably knock Dylan Cruz out to one of the corner outfield spots. That's how good of a defender he is, and I wouldn't be shocked to see that happen in the long term. He made that really difficult jump up to AA this year, and although he did struggle a little bit, his on-base percentage was about 334, his OPS was about 825, so not great numbers, but definitely good, especially for a 21-year-old. He just didn't have that same wow factor that a lot of people expected from a top 10 prospect making the jump to a higher level. That speed doesn't necessarily translate into steals, it just means he's a better defender, and he can take a base if he needs to. He had 10 steals, so he's not going to be a stolen base heavy guy. Again, he's a bigger frame, so that plus speed is a good thing, but it's just not going to get him a lot of stolen bases. But 10 is definitely a serviceable number across 87 games, and he stole 10 bases across 42 games in high A this year as well. So it's not like he's a slouch. It's just jumping up to a higher level, focus on the fundamentals, getting that down before stealing bases. That's just part of the game. I don't think he's going to be a top 10 prospect when MLB Pipeline re-releases their update. You have Jackson Holiday, Chirrillo, Skeens, Cruz, Salas, Caminero, Evan Carter, who are already up there, and you're going to have people like Wyatt Langford, who might be the next number 1 prospect on MLB Pipeline. You never know, coming in and trying to usurp that value. So I wouldn't be shocked if his mediocre showing in AA drops him down a little bit, but it's not going to be too far because, again, he's only 21, and the jump from high A to AA is huge. Ask any talent evaluator, they will tell you that same thing. This video is long enough, so let's knock through the last 2 players in a bit of rapid fire. Robert Hassell was a highly touted prospect coming over from this deal from the Nationals to the Padres. He was their second-rate prospect according to MLB Pipeline at the time of the deal, and now he's fallen to 8th on the Nationals list at the end of this year, but that's just because he hasn't had a phenomenal year. He was the first-round pick of the Padres, 8th overall in the 2020 MLB draft, and the left-handed center fielder really had a lot of potential coming out of prep school, which a lot of people at that time thought that the prepsters weren't going to get taken very highly because with the shortened draft, 5 rounds, a lot of them are expected to go to school. The big issue with him is the fact that he was really hurt at the end of 2021. He broke his hamate, and he didn't do great in AA, which again is a very tough jump, so I'm not knocking that against him in 2022, but it is something to consider. He'll be 22 for most of the year next year, so he's still young, but he does need to go ahead and get that bat rolling. His numbers at AA this year weren't very good either. He had a 225 batting average, a 316 on base percentage. He struck out 152 times in only 414 at-bats. That's just not sustainable. He doesn't have that same prospect pedigree as he did before, and I frankly wouldn't be shocked to see him drop a little bit lower on this list. He's a guy who might be good as a 4th outfielder, but looking at what they have now, Dylan Cruz, James Wood, Elijah Green was a recent draft pick of theirs as well. Or maybe like a Jacob Young, who made his major league debut this year and looked pretty decent. There's a lot of options that can go around in the Nationals outfield on top of who they already have. So maybe he's a guy who ends up in a prospect for prospect swap. Doesn't happen too often, but I wouldn't be shocked to see that happen if a team thinks they can fix him, because since he got traded to the Nationals, things have not looked great, and I wouldn't be shocked if a change of scenery might help him out a little bit. He projects to be a really good defender, which isn't something that a lot of people thought would happen coming out of high school, but he definitely improved on that a lot. He has above average speed, but his hit tool is about average, and he doesn't have that great power, so he doesn't have a lot of room to grow above his defensive ability and maybe refining his swing a little bit. So he has to really tap into that potential to really make it into the major leagues and be successful. Don't know how that's going to happen. I really hope it does, because he is a really good player when he is in his groove. But right now, the 6'1", 195-pound outfielder just doesn't have it in him. Finally made it to the last player, and that's Jarlin Susana, the #1 ranked pitching prospect in MLB Pipeline's ranking of the 2022 International Signing Period class. The Padres signed him for $1.7 million when the signing period opened, and that's because he has one of the best fastballs you will ever see. It's not perfect, but it's touched 103 miles an hour, which was the hardest pitch thrown by a Nationals minor league player ever. And that was just after he debuted coming over from the trade. So you can see 103, that's just wild. His control isn't horrible. It's not great, but it's decent enough. So if you can control 103 miles an hour, about average, you never know what can happen. I mean, look at Aroldis Chapman. He throws heat. His control is not great, but he makes batters miss because that speed is tough to deal with. He's only 19 years old, which is really impressive to throw that fast, and he has a really, really good slider too. Think of like Emmanuel Clase for the Guardians, just that wipeout slider that really can make a lot of batters swing and miss. So to pair that with a 103-mile-an-hour fastball, this guy has the potential to be a star closer, and that's why he was such a highly touted prospect coming out of the 2022 international signing period. He also has a changeup and a curveball that are a little bit below average, but are good changeup pace pitches. They're not anything amazing, but they're good enough to go and be serviceable secondary pitches for him to use in his major league career should he end up getting there, which frankly he probably should. He was young for single A this year with a 5.14 ERA, so maybe things will come down when he comes and becomes more age appropriate. He was very aggressively placed in high A this year, so we'll see. But with those kind of measurables and that speed on his fastball and that wipe on his slider, he will be a dominant pitcher for probably years to come. It's really interesting to note that probably the two players that have the potential to be the best for the Nationals are two that haven't debuted yet in Jarlin Susana and James Wood. Granted, they have a lot of talent in the players that they got, like a CJ Abrams or MacKenzie Gore, but the excitement of a prospect really seems to usurp any value, especially from a fan's perspective, of what you can get of your current players. Especially because they're young and they haven't reached their full potential. Players like Gore and Abrams don't seem to really, shoot for the sky and make national fans super excited of what they've done. But this is important to know, again, they're young. They have a lot of time to develop and grow. And with the Nationals, you are able to afford that opportunity because you're not expected to win for a couple of years. And if one of these guys hit, whether it's Susana or Wood, or maybe Robert Hassell has a resurgent 2024, you're going to be a better team for it. Granted, the Padres were really looking forward to have Juan Soto in their lineup to win a World Series. That might not happen. It'll all matter what they decide to do this offseason and what they decide to do with their managerial role. I think that will be a big factor in it. Bob Melvin was a really, really good manager, and things just didn't work out there, but it's not either party's fault. I just think it was a bad fit. Thank you again for watching this video. I really, really appreciate it. Go ahead and look at those two videos if you're interested in watching other content that I've produced. Hopefully one of those interests you as well. And that baseball down there in the middle will take you to my channel where you can go ahead and subscribe. It really, really helps out, and I appreciate it a lot. Thank you so much for helping, and I hope you enjoy this video, and I hope to see you the next time I post.